An elderly man heartlessly tied three defenseless German shepherd puppies to a tree, abandoning them to the merciless sun. But then a soldier did the unimaginable. The tiny pups, barely able to stand on their wobbly legs, were left to perish under the scorching heat, without food, water, or hope. People passed by, some shaking their heads in dismay, yet no one intervened, until a soldier, fresh from a grueling mission and bearing unseen wounds, noticed them. What he did next would change everything, renewing faith in second chances, loyalty, and the profound bond between a warrior and the silent souls he chose to save. It was a suffocating heat, the kind that stole the breath away, under the unrelenting late summer sun in a small town in Minas Gerais. The cracked earth baked, and even the birds sought shelter. For the three 6-week-old puppies, tied to a mosquito-ridden tree on the edge of an abandoned lot, there was no escape. Their oversized paws and floppy ears made them look even more vulnerable. The darkest one let out a soft, frightened whimper, while his siblings, one sandy-furred and the other with a white patch on its chest, whined in response. The rough rope chafed their paws as they struggled, hungry and terrified, longing for their mother who had vanished hours before. The man who left them didn't utter a word. An elderly neighbor watched from her half-drawn window, shaking her head in disbelief. She'd seen him arrive in his rusty old truck, tie the pups without haste, wipe the sweat from his brow, and drive away. She called animal control, but no one came. In a place like this, she doubted anyone would arrive in time for 3 unwanted dogs. But help was on its way. Sergeant Carlos Silva had been home just 12 days after 8 years in the army and 2 overseas tours. He'd returned to his late father's property to settle the inheritance and figure out civilian life. The quiet town echoed with childhood memories, but now it felt different, harsher, emptier, as if part of him had been replaced by something unyielding. That afternoon, Carlos walked a dusty road, his boots kicking up clouds of earth as he stared at the horizon. He needed to clear his mind from the weight pressing on his chest. The silence that once soothed him now rang in his ears. Then, he heard a faint, broken cry, followed by another. At first, he thought it was a memory's echo, but the sound persisted, clear and real. He followed it through a broken fence to the 3 panting pups, barely moving. Carlos's breath caught as he knelt down. The smell hit him, a mix of sweat, dirt, and desperation. The brown pup was curled up, eyes half closed and nearly unconscious. The smallest one recoiled at his shadow, while the dark-furred one struggled to rise, letting out a weak growl. Carlos's heart tightened. "It's okay," he murmured softly. "I won't hurt you." He pulled a small knife from his pocket and carefully cut the ropes. One by one, the pups fell into his arms, their frail bodies light and silent. He opened his canteen and offered them water from his hand. They drank as if they hadn't in days. Rage and a deeper sense of duty stirred within him, a duty he thought he'd buried with his uniform. Gently, he gathered them up and whispered, "You're coming with me. I've seen too much to let this slide." As he carried them to his truck, the smallest one lifted its head slightly, resting its chin on his wrist. Carlos didn't know it yet, but this rescue would begin healing for them all. With no real plan, Carlos faced a challenge far from explosives or hostile terrain, caring for 3 trembling pups. He took them to his father's old garage, which still smelled of motor oil and forgotten memories. He made a cozy spot with worn sleeping bags and laid them down. They were so fragile, especially the one with the white patch, who whimpered with every move. Kneeling beside them, Carlos opened a can of wet food and said quietly, "I don't even know your names yet." He dipped his fingers in the food and offered it to them. At first, they hesitated, but soon their tongues lapped at his hand. The brown one ate hungrily, while the dark-furred one watched Carlos intently. Leaning against the wall, Carlos let out a long sigh, realizing how tense he'd been since his return. As the pups settled, their breathing steady, he felt a fragile truth take root. That night, the smallest one cried softly, a sound that echoed through the garage and pierced Carlos's heart. He sat up quickly, his pulse racing like old patrol nights, and cradled the pup in his jacket. "You're safe now, I promise," he whispered. Gradually, the crying stopped, and for the first time in months, his thoughts quieted. The next morning, Carlos awoke stiff against the wall, the pup with the white patch asleep on his arm, the others at his feet. He hadn't planned to keep them forever, just help them recover and find a proper home. But these weren't ordinary dogs. Even weakened, their German Shepherd lineage shone through, bred for police or military work, yet discarded. Carlos couldn't fathom why. Later that day, he brought them into the empty house, filled with dusty furniture and unopened mail. It had never felt like a home since his mother's death, and his father had grown cold. But as the pups scampered around, sniffing tables and barking at their reflections, life returned. Carlos laughed as the brown one tumbled into a laundry basket, and the dark-furred one barked in playful protest. "Focus and loyalty," he said, stroking its head. "You're a handful, but you've got spirit." Over the next 3 days, a transformation unfolded for the pups and Carlos. He named the smallest one Estella for the crescent-shaped patch, the brown one Dorado for his sandy fur, and the dark-furred one Fogo for his bold eyes. Estella ate without fear now. Dorado followed Carlos everywhere, and Fogo watched him like a soldier awaiting orders, patient and sharp. One morning, Carlos sipped black coffee on the porch while the pups explored the yard. He even hummed a tune as he built a simple shelter from scrap wood. Then, a black sedan slowed on the road. Carlos tensed, instincts kicking in. The driver, an older man with a piercing gaze, rolled down the window. "Are you Carlos?" he asked. Introducing himself as Señor Almeida, he said, "I see you have 3 valuable German Shepherd pups, bred for police work." "Why would I have them?" Carlos replied cautiously. Almeida explained he'd come for them from a breeder named Conrado Neves, but they were gone. A friend said they went to a better home. Carlos's jaw tightened. Conrado's name rang familiar from his father's old papers. As Almeida eyed the yard, Fogo appeared, ears alert. "They show potential," Almeida murmured. "Attitude." "They're just pups," Carlos said, stepping forward, "rescued from a terrible situation." Almeida narrowed his eyes. "You're no ordinary civilian, are you?" "I'm not here to fight," Almeida added. "But these dogs weren't abandoned by accident. They were hidden." With a steady voice, Carlos replied, "If someone tied them to a tree and left them to die, they don't deserve them. And now they're mine, to care for properly." Almeida smiled faintly. "You're lucky." He drove off, leaving dust in his wake. Carlos stood there, heart pounding, realizing these pups were more than strays. They were treasures, and now someone knew. That night, Carlos sat by the window, rifle at his side, as the pups slept peacefully. His mind raced with questions. Why hide them? Why let them suffer? And why did Fogo seem to understand more than a pup should? The next morning, he found a locked drawer with documents about a tactical canine training program in Sao Paulo. A photo of a German shepherd like Fogo bore the words, Progenitor Maximus, killed in action. Suddenly, it all made sense. These pups were living legacies. By week's end, the pups had adapted to their routine, and so had Carlos. They knew the sound of his boots, the times for meals and play. A deeper bond formed. Dorado's playful clumsiness, Estella's gentle shadow at his side, and Fogo's uncanny focus. Carlos hadn't meant to train them, but old habits die hard. He tossed a ball, and Fogo retrieved it with precision. When he whistled, Fogo stopped and sat, as if he'd done it before. One vast blue morning, Carlos set up a simple obstacle course in the yard, with barrels and boxes, ready to test their spirit, and perhaps his own. It was nothing sophisticated, just a simple test to see how the pups would react. Goldie got distracted by a butterfly before the next turn. Stella froze, looking uncertain, but Fogo's gaze was locked on Carlos. "Stay," he said, and Fogo immediately settled. "Come!" Fogo darted forward, hitting the ground in the blink of an eye. Carlos's heart sped up as he knelt beside him, placing a hand on the puppy's back. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he murmured softly. "Or maybe it's just part of you." Fogo remained perfectly still, attentive. In that moment, Carlos felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Later, he reopened the folder and scanned the sire's name. Maximus, a war dog who, according to the reports, had saved 3 soldiers during an ambush in Syria before being killed in action. He realized that Maximus's descendant was now under his roof. It all made sense. The intelligence, the discipline, the fire in Fogo's eyes. These pups were bred for service, and someone had tried to erase them. That night, Carlos couldn't sleep. He paced the hallway, his mind racing with questions. Why did Conrado Neves let them go? Why tie them up instead of activating the program? Was there something to hide? His thoughts were cut short by a noise from outside. A thump, followed by another. Carlos froze and went to the window, where he spotted a shadow near the shed, a figure moving stealthily. Someone was on his property. Without hesitating, he grabbed his shotgun, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch with a practiced calm. The moonlight illuminated the gravel driveway, and near the shed, a man was crouching with a flashlight, searching the area. "Hey!" Carlos called out. The man shot up, startled, and then bolted. Carlos didn't fire, but Fogo did something astonishing. The puppy surged forward, barking with a deep, authoritative tone that no pup should possess. Moving faster than his siblings, faster than Carlos could have expected, he positioned himself directly in the intruder's path. The man stumbled in surprise, fell hard to the ground, and then scrambled to his car, which sped off down the road. Carlos scooped Fogo up, his heart pounding, and whispered, "You just held the line. You weren't afraid. You were dedicated to protecting us." Fogo licked his chin once and then snuggled into his arms. In that moment, it became clear to Carlos, this wasn't just a pet. This was a partner. The next morning, Carlos made a decision. He wasn't handing the puppies over, not to the program, not to a shelter, and definitely not to whoever wanted them dead. They weren't just puppies anymore. They were his responsibility, and he wouldn't let them down. Carlos had seen true fear in war, but nothing unsettled him more than the thought of someone trespassing on his property in the middle of the night to take dogs. Fogo's courageous defense only strengthened his resolve. These dogs weren't just abandoned or forgotten. They were valuable, sought after, and tragically, marked for the wrong reasons. As dawn broke, Carlos headed into town, Fogo sitting quietly in the passenger seat, as alert as if he knew this world could be a dangerous place. He parked in the gravel lot behind the police station. Sheriff Henrique, who had known Carlos since he was a teenager, greeted him. He was a sturdy man with graying hair and a deep voice. "Well, if it isn't Sergeant Silva," the sheriff said, eyeing Fogo. "This the new recruit?" Carlos gave a faint smile. "I need a favor." The sheriff listened intently as Carlos told him everything: the abandonment, the folder he found in his father's closet, Mr. Almeida's visit, and the shadow near the shed. When he finished, the sheriff leaned in. "You're not wrong about the program. The K-9 Tactical Training Group is private, well-funded, and they hate bad publicity. They've had issues before." "What kind of issues?" Carlos asked. "Failed litters, temperament problems. In one case, 3 pups were sold too early. In another, one turned aggressive and bit a child." Carlos's jaw tightened. "So they cover it up," the sheriff continued. "They bury the problems. No headlines, no lawsuits." "Conrado Neves," Carlos muttered. The sheriff nodded. "That name has popped up in a few reports. The program's handlers push the dogs too hard, and they don't like people asking questions." Carlos looked down at Fogo, who was resting calmly beside his boot. "He's not dangerous," he stated with conviction. "He's disciplined, intelligent, protective. I've served with soldiers who had less loyalty." The sheriff studied Fogo. "He doesn't look like a problem." "He's not," Carlos repeated. "But someone thinks he is." The sheriff sighed. "I'll run the name Neves, but you be careful, Carlos. These people don't knock twice." Back at home, Carlos didn't just feel protective. He felt hunted. He reinforced the windows, moved the puppy's box into his bedroom, and kept the shotgun loaded and within reach. That night, as he fed the pups and sat on the floor with them, he pulled out the folder one more time. Fogo curled up against his leg, tail wagging slowly, as Carlos traced his fingers over the lineage chart. Maximus, the sire, killed in combat in Syria and honored with a medal. Delilah, the dam, still alive in some kennel connected to the program. It was then that his eyes fell on a single handwritten note at the bottom of the page. Batch 0099. Litter rejected for instability. Destroy by end of week. Carlos's breath caught in his throat. Rejected. Destroyed. That's what they had intended to do. His fist clenched around the paper. "They were never meant to survive," he whispered. "And now someone wants to finish what their creator started." Carlos got to his feet and looked at the 3 puppies. Stella was sleeping on her back, dreaming, her little paws twitching. Goldie was chewing on the edge of a cushion, and Fogo was staring up at him, as if waiting for a command. "You're not rejects," Carlos said, his voice low. "You're fighters." He walked to the closet and pulled out a heavy, olive-drab canvas duffel bag he hadn't touched since he came home. Inside were his old training gloves, utility gear, a whistle, and a new purpose. He wasn't just going to protect them. He was going to train them, strengthen them, and make them visible. Because if anyone wanted to erase them, they would have to go through him first. The next morning began like any other. The puppies were growing stronger. Goldie had gained weight. Stella wagged her tail with more confidence. And Fogo, ever alert, was already responding to Carlos's voice as if he were born for it. Carlos set up a small obstacle course in the backyard. tunnels made from old tires, jump bars from reclaimed wood, and even a makeshift scent station using old gloves and cans of tuna. What had started as simple curiosity had become a routine. Fogo excelled. His posture, his timing, his focused gaze on Carlos's every command. It all echoed the discipline once taught to soldiers. It wasn't just instinct. It was something deeper. As if Fogo had chosen Carlos, not the other way around. Good boy, Carlos whispered after a perfect run, and Fogo's tail thumped with pride. Inside, Carlos returned to the folder and read the words again. Batch 0099. Rejected for instability. But there was no instability, no aggression, nothing to justify what had been done to these pups. So why? He was still staring at the paper when Stella started to bark. It was a short, sharp yip, not playful, but an alert. Carlos stood abruptly and went to the window. A black SUV had stopped on the dirt road leading to his house. It hadn't pulled up fast or slow, just with a deliberate certainty. He grabbed his shotgun and stepped onto the porch, Fogo at his heels, head low and ears pricked. The SUV parked about 20 yards away. The engine idled, and then the door opened. It wasn't Mr. Almeida. A younger man in a sharp suit and sunglasses emerged. He didn't smile or call out. He just stood by the car, hands in his pockets, his eyes hidden behind dark lenses. Carlos called out, "Can I help you?" The man tilted his head. "Mr. Morera, I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you." Carlos didn't flinch. "I think you're at the wrong place." "I don't think so," the man said coolly. "You are in possession of 3 police lineage German Shepherds, property of the Canine Tactical Training Program. I'm here to collect them." "Collect them?" Carlos replied, his voice just as cold. "You mean the dogs that were tied to a tree and left for dead?" "They were scheduled for removal," the man said calmly. "It was a directive from the director. You shouldn't have interfered. We were correcting a mistake." Carlos's knuckles turned white on the shotgun's grip. Behind him, Fogo took an alert stance, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The man gestured toward the SUV, and the back door opened, revealing another figure carrying a black case, the kind used for tranquilizer guns, not firearms. But the message was clear. They were here to take the puppies alive, by force if necessary. "I'm going to say this only once," Carlos declared. "Get off my property." The man in the suit took a slow step forward. "You were a soldier, Morera. You know how this works. Orders are orders. You might think you're protecting them, but you're just delaying the inevitable." Carlos raised the shotgun slightly. "I'm not delaying anything. I'm ending it." The man hesitated, his gaze flicking to Fogo, who was now a picture of bonded loyalty. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Then he nodded to his partner. The man with the case started toward the house. Carlos didn't fire. Instead, Fogo shot forward like a flash, crossing the space in seconds. He planted himself directly in front of the intruder, barking with an intensity that echoed through the hills. Stella and Goldie joined him, smaller but just as determined, forming a living barrier between the threat and their home. The man with the case backed away slowly, glanced one last time at Carlos, and retreated to the SUV. The vehicle reversed, kicked up a cloud of dust, and disappeared down the road. Carlos's heart hammered in his chest as he knelt beside Fogo, placing both hands on the dog's head. "You chose to protect us," he whispered, "just like I chose you." That night, Carlos locked all the doors, but for the first time he didn't feel alone. This wasn't just about saving puppies anymore. It was about standing up to something much bigger. And after so long, Carlos Moreira had found a cause to fight for, and someone who would fight right alongside him. No car returned, no new threats appeared. There was only silence. But Carlos knew it wasn't over. He gathered all the documents, the evidence, and the photographs, and gave everything to Sheriff Henrique. The investigation began. Weeks later, the Canine Tactical Training Program was exposed. Conrado Neves was arrested, justice was finally served, and the puppies remained with Carlos. Goldie was placed with a young boy on the autism spectrum. Stella was adopted by a retired military widow who said she hadn't smiled in years, until Stella came into her life. And Fogo never left Carlos's side. Together they trained, they healed, and they began visiting schools, veteran centers, and local shelters, reminding everyone that even the rejected deserve a second chance. When Carlos looked at Fogo now, he didn't just see a dog, he saw redemption.